So happy Sunday and welcome back to managerial accounting. And there are two little topics, although they didn't show up in the homework, they likely will show up on the next exam, which I know you're already looking forward to in the multiple choice area. And there's one method of allocating joint costs, which we haven't talked about yet, or I haven't illustrated, although I've talked about it. I haven't actually given you an illustration of it, called the net realizable value method. And then I also want to talk about, this is a course in managerial accounting, and as we know, we prepare reports for management to make decisions. So we'll look at how to review a report that includes service cost and also allocation of joint costs as well. So here goes, net realizable value method. Net realizable value method, what we mean by net realizable value is basically we estimate the selling price of a product less any cost necessary to process the product further beyond the split off point. So to get the net realizable value for a product, we have to take the final selling price multiplied by the quantity, and then to subtract out any additional processing costs that we may have after split off. That'll give us the net realizable value. Now, there's some products that we have a choice. We could process them further, or we could say, hey, wait a minute, it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to process them further. We'd actually do better to get to sell them at split off. So if that's the case, then the net realizable value would simply be the selling price at split off multiplied by the quantity. And you'll see in the example that we're going to illustrate, sometimes we have to do two computations. We've got to compare what the net realizable value would be if we processed it further, as opposed to net realizable value if we decided just to sell it at split off, and we'll take the larger of the two to figure out how to allocate the joint costs. So let's see how this works. So we've got three products here. We're back to the Davis Pharmaceuticals, and I think we've got this mud from the Dead Sea that we harvest into skin cream, shampoo, into soap. And this is what it costs us, additional processing costs beyond split off. And then here's the selling price after further processing. So notice we've got a selling price at split off, and then we've got a selling price after further processing. And this is what it costs for the additional processing costs. We want to process it further after split off, right? And what we find, and when we do the actual comparison here, when we get to shampoo, its value is actually higher at the split off point without further processing. So we're going to decide not to process it further. So here's the cost data we need to get the net realizable value. So as I said, we're going to do two calculations. We're going to ask ourselves the skin cream. Well, if I sell it at at split off and I don't process it further, its net realizable value is 108,000. But if I go ahead and process it further, I'm going to get a higher selling price. We're going to have additional costs beyond split off of 2,000. So notice that the net realizable value with further processing is actually higher. The 144 is higher than the 108. And with shampoo, notice we could sell it for 72,000 at split off, or if we process it further, we could sell it for 59,750. So it doesn't make any sense to process it further. Why would you want to process it further when processing it further gives you a net realizable value lower than what you'd get actually at the if you sold it at split off? And then the soap, soap at split off really has no value, so you got to process it further. So the soap, if processed it further, ends up with a net realizable value of 72,000. So this is how we get net realizable value. We take the selling price times the quantity, that gives us the total sales. Then we factor in the additional processing costs beyond split off. We come up with a value, and we pick the larger of the two for each product. If selling it at split off or processing it further, we take the larger of the two. So we see skin cream as net realizable value is higher if we process it further. Shampoo is higher if we actually sell it at split off. And with soap, we really don't have an option to sell it at split off. We got to process it further. So those are the numbers that you use, and you come up with this table. So you come up with a net realizable value of 288. So all those numbers there, we had to make a selection of each of the options that we had in the previous slide. Here is our net realizable value. So our joint costs remain 233,840. So we use these percentages. So it's 50% goes to skin cream and 25% goes to soap and shampoo. And notice, so we've always do our work correctly here. So here's the net realizable value. Here were the joint costs. So we allocate the joint costs of 233,840, and we come up with those amounts based on net realizable value. Now, question remains, with all these things, which is the best method to use, which is the most accurate? Well, in the case of the allocation of joint costs, there really is not one more accurate than the other. It really depends upon the circumstances of the product. So we know that physical units is the easiest to allocate because of the pounds. Weighted average probably allocates significantly more cost to shampoo because it takes more time to process the shampoo. Market value at split off and the net realizable value method allocate the highest cost to skincare due to the high value of this product. And under the market value at split off, shampoo receives the next highest allocation of costs, followed by soap. So when you put them all together, all the different methods, so here's the allocation you'd get when we did physical units. Here's the allocation that you'd get if you use weighted average. Here's the allocation you get if you use market value, and here's the allocation that you'd get under the net realizable value. So what you should be prepared to do is to be able to come up with the allocation of the joint cost under physical units, weighted average, market value, and net realizable value. Okay. Now, there also, we haven't talked about them much, but there are byproducts. So byproducts is a good that is produced as a result of the production process that's pretty small in value. So we don't allocate the revenues that we get from these byproducts. We don't allocate the costs. We don't allocate. What we basically do is we take the amount that we receive from selling the byproduct, and we reduce that, the joint cost. So for Davis Pharmaceutical, there's a small amount of mercury from the mud that we extract early it's an early step in joint production. So what we do, rather than incur costs of further processing that mercury, we simply dispose of it, or disposing of it in an environmentally safe manner, because mercury can be highly toxic. You may have heard the expression "Mad Hatter." They used to put mercury in hats, and the people who made hats used to go mad from the mercury. That's where the term, if you ever hear the term "Mad Hatter," that's where it comes from. So what they do is they decide to rather than disposing of it in an environmentally safe manner, they go and they sell it to a manufacturer for $320 a batch. So what that $320 a batch would do would just be a reduction of the joint costs. Okay, so think of byproducts as a small revenue stream that comes out of the, it's a small quantity that comes out of the joint production process. We don't allocate any cost to it. We take the proceeds from that and we use that to reduce the joint cost that we allocate to other products. That's what I mean by byproducts. Okay. And the last thing I want to do here is just to talk about using a support department and joint allocation costs for performance evaluation. So we got a report, and we're going to evaluate each of the managers here, and for 3 different departments. And you got to be careful when you analyze these costs, because when you want to analyze the performance of the manager who's responsible for each of these different divisions or product lines, you want to make sure that your evaluation is knowledgeable about the costs that you can't just make the decision of who's doing a better job controlling costs on the basis of the total difference, the total variance in costs. Okay, so we've got 3 general managers, and they oversee 3 separate chemical lines. Olefix, so that's Jamal Williams; Dryson, which is Jen Tolley; and Jetsel, which is Tanisha Strongley. So you're evaluating these 3 managers, and you got to ask yourself, which is the one who is doing the better job of controlling costs? So when you look at this detailed report here, if you look at it, you'd say, well, geez, it's easy to say Jamal is over budget, the total combined amount that Jamal is over budget is 148,000, and Jen is over cost 123,600, and the Tanisha strongly is over budget 42,350. So it might be very tempting to say, well, Janice, the Tanisha is overall is doing the best job because they're all over budget, but she's only over budget 42,350. All right. So that I would say to you would be kind of faulty in evaluating it. Let's dig into this a little bit more detail. You got to ask yourself, what cost do these individual managers actually control? So what they actually control or they have a direct influence on is direct materials and direct labor. So if you just take the combined amount of direct materials and direct labor, and the parenthesis means that they're under budget, Jamil is the combined total of 1,750 negative and 2,200. So Jamil is actually over budget $450. And then if you look at Jen Tully, if you take the difference between the 35 between actually add them together, Jen is under budget for materials. She's under budget. So she's under budget for both the things that she can directly control for $3,800. So you might say, hey, the one who's doing the best job managing cost is actually is Jen, because she's under budget in the two areas that she can directly control. And then if we look at Tanisha here, Tanisha, you got 36,000 over budget with materials, and you got 1,650. So that's roughly, I didn't do the calculation, that's roughly 34,000 and change over budget. So if you did the basis on the evaluation on the basis of who is best doing the best job for the cost that they can actually control, you'd say it would be Jen. And then scroll down to the bottom here. You've got, this is an allocation of the joint support costs, and they have no direct control over this. This is just based on the number of employees. So the most of the budget being over budget for Jamel comes from the allocation that Jamel received of the support costs, which Jamel may have no actual control over. Okay, so these costs here, which are allocating to them, they may have very little control over. And then if you look at the allocation of joint costs, notice again that Jamel is over budget on just $1,000, but Jen is over budget $125,000. So this is the allocation of costs on the basis of the net realizable value, which takes a look at the the value of the products as a basis of allocation. And then you would see that Giselle is only over budget $2,000. So point of that discussion is twofold. Don't just judge the performance of the manager on the basis of the total amount that they're over or under budget. Take a look at the stuff that they control, and then take a look at those costs that may have been assigned to them that they may not have any direct influence, or they're just assigned to them. Those would be the support department costs. Okay. All right. So that's it for this chapter. So again, you didn't have any homework on this chapter, so I'm not likely to give you a problem on the exam, but this is relative to these two topics, but this is fair game for multiple choice, the next exam. All right. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be well, everybody, and we will see you on Tuesday. Adios, au revoir, hasta luego. Let me stop sharing. And let me close here. The Eiffel Tower in the background.